if you like me, you like automations, and automations are fun to set up and they solve having to do mundane tasks all day long. But also automations help organizations grow and scale, but oftentimes people are hesitant to attempt automations because they feel it requires being some kind of mad scientist working in a lab all night, running experiments. In reality, automations are very simple, and depending on what you're trying to automate, can be done in only a few hours, leaving plenty of time to get coffee. Usually, the best way to automate is to leverage an application's API. This is typically something that you find very common in SaaS-based applications and cloud solutions. JumpCloud has a RESTful API that allows IT admins to fully automate their directory of users, systems, user groups, and other resources. The documentation is pretty helpful, but just reading the documentation can sometimes be a bit, well, boring if you ask me, because I don't like documentation, as we all know. Unless you're really into API documentation, hey, go for it. So what we're going to do is we're going to dive into how to use Postman, which is an HTTP API testing tool to help you leverage and interface with the JumpCloud API to get a list of users and also create a user using this application called Postman. Now, before we begin, it is full disclosure that I am a JumpCloud full-time employee. I do post these videos on my own YouTube channel as well as on other platforms, and sometimes even on the JumpCloud YouTube channel. But this video is more so how to automate in general. We're just going to use JumpCloud as the endpoint that we're going to test against. So looking at the JumpCloud documentation, we can see that there are a couple of endpoints. There's the Directory Insights endpoint, the JumpCloud API version 1 and version 2. Directory Insights gives you a JSON object of all of the events that happen in your organization. So things such as, looking here, deleting a user, updating users, deleting or logging in, basically all of the different events that you can imagine that can happen within your organization all happen here, and these are the events from the last hour. It gives you all of the data that you need. Going back into the documentation for our API, we're looking at the JumpCloud version 1 API, which is slightly different than the version 2, and we'll talk about those differences here in a moment. So the version 1 is more along the lines of the objects of the top level pieces of your directory. So things such as devices, users, resources, authentication, right? We're looking at things such as commands, systems, as well as system users. So let's look at the system users object for a second. So a couple of the endpoints that we're going to dive in today is list all system users, and then we're going to create a system user. We're also going to list a particular system user, but we're going to do it in a different way, right? So list all system users allows you to pull a list of, well, all of the users that were in your organization. You can default to a limit of 10, which I think is the default. You can, I think this goes up to 100 you can put in there. You can also filter out the users by departments or by a filter field directly. So if I look at the entire object here, I can filter out all of these different fields and look for a particular value. So for instance, if I wanted to grab the department and I wanted to look at a marketing department or accounting department, I can look at that and I can pull all the users that were in this department directly. So pretty neat in that respect. So simple API stuff. If you already know about API, then you can go ahead and ignore the video altogether. But this is for people who want to get involved in this kind of stuff. And this is great because if you use Postman to get a good understanding as to how the API endpoints work, then plugging them into other automation tools such as Zapier or IFTTT or Power Automate, those things become a lot easier because you already know what the headers look like, you know what it's asking for, and you know how to move forward with that. Going back into the front page here, looking at version 2.0, we know that the system user endpoint is all about the user object, so it gives you all the information regarding the user, whereas the user's endpoint over here on this documentation gives us the associations of the user, right? So what directories are bound to the user, what's the parent groups of the user, etc., etc. So it gives you a general idea. And you might hear my daughter in the background playing with our puppy, so I apologize for that, but it's kind of cute. All right, so moving on, we're going to go back into our version 1 documentation, because what we're going to do today is we're going to look at how to leverage the system users endpoint. This is a very basic rudimentary level introduction into this. We might get into some more advanced documentation or API stuff in the future, but for now we're just going to do our building blocks and then kind of go from there. So what we want to do is we want to look at this endpoint, and we want to just basically get a good understanding as to what we're looking for, right? So to filter a filter to apply the query, you have your operators. So for complex searches, see the related search domain endpoints, which we'll talk about at some point. But we're looking at so we have a search here, but we have filter structure, right? Field operator value. These are going to be important when we start looking at how to get a list of users by marketing department. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to look at a user for a second here. We want to look at, for instance, we're going to look at John Babel, and we're just going to look to see the details here. So we have, you know, their first name, last name, email, username, but we also have their password, etc. So we're going to look at their employment information, and we're going to put them in the field of marketing. All right, save user. Okay, so now we have 3 users, and we have their passwords are expired, but that's fine, whatever. We're not worried about that. These are all test users. They don't really exist. Okay, so let's go ahead and go into Postman real quick. And we're going to create, I already created a workspace. To create a new workspace, you just come in here, you hit create workspace. I created a workspace called JumpCloud Playground, and we have no APIs yet, no collections. You can create an API collection by doing it manually, but what I like to do is just import. So the way we import is we go over here to our JumpCloud version 1, go to overview. It takes you to this header, scroll up a little bit. We're gonna hit download, and this is where we download that YAML file. So we're gonna hit the little import button here, and we're gonna upload files. And here is the index.yaml. Hit open, and we're gonna bring this in as a collection. Hit import, and it's gonna scrub that YAML file, and it's going to create a collection of API endpoints that we're going to be able to easily leverage. All right. File structure is a little funky when it comes in, so it brings in its draft API. So here is your API collection for JumpCloud. The first thing we want to do is we want to set up some variables. So we're going to click on this little collection section here, and we're going to look at our variables. There are 2 variables that I want to define. There's already one that's set by default, which is the base URL. And that is the base URL for where your endpoints go. So basically console.jumpcloud.com/API/system-users is where we're going to be heading at, because that's the endpoint. But we do need 2 other variables. So we're going to set one for your xorg ID, right? And we're going to set one for your x API key, right? And then what we're going to do is go into our admin panel here, and we're going to grab the organization ID. You do that by going into settings, grab the organization ID, hit the little copy button here, and go back into there and just paste that in. API key, we're going to grab the API settings, and we're going to generate a new API key. Now, if you do this and you already have integrations, you just broke all your integrations. I do it because this is a test environment, and I just like having a new API key every time. Bam. All right. Then we hit save. So now we have all these variables, and we're going to see how that plays in here in a minute. Makes it very easy to update things. So we're going to system users. Let's just get a list of all of our system users. So looking at our headers here, we have the API key, which is coming from the authorization tab. We'll get there in a second. But then we also have our xorg ID. We already defined a variable in the collection level. So you just do 2 open brackets, and you're able to grab the xorg. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy, that's right. And then authorization, we're gonna come in here, and we're going to do, again, we're gonna grab the x API key. We're gonna hit save. All right, so if you look at the call here, base URL, which is console.jumpcloud.com, we're going to grab all of our system users. They're doing some filters. We're just going to go ahead and filter or remove all of the filters out of there for right now. Cool. And hit send. All right, so it looks like we got ourselves 3 users in our organization. Going back into our admin panel here, we've got 1, 2, 3 users, in fact. All right, and going through here, we see that we have our LDAP admin, we've got IT admin. These are all the users that we have. This is fantastic. We even have John Babel, and if you look here, we have our department marketing. So let's go ahead and filter by the department marketing. So we're gonna do a question mark filter, and I already have some stuff that are already pre-populated, but we're just gonna do this manually. So we're gonna say equals department, if I can type, right? And we're gonna say this is $ equals, right? And we're gonna say marketing, just like that, and hit send. And what we have now is we have a total of 1, right? Which is John Babel. He's part of the marketing department. We know that because we defined it ourselves. Bam, right there. This is a JSON object, so you can pretty much do this, you know, however, right? And this is the pretty version. You can look at the raw version, which is just a dump of it. You can preview it, even though it doesn't really do anything. So the pretty version of JSON, which is nice because it allows you to even collapse things, right? So if you wanted to collapse certain objects that are happening in here, you can, but this is all just one object. Cool. So that's getting a list of users. Now, what if you want to get a list of a specific user? So we can do that in a couple of ways. So once we can come in here, we can do filter, and we can say username, right? And again, we can say equals, and we can say username was, I think it was John.Babel. Well, there is no username dot, so it's 2 B's. It's 2 B's. Babel. Okay. There we go. We pulled that up. Now, another way we can do it is by ID, right? So here is your ID, right? And that's another endpoint. So you see here where it has ID. What we're gonna do is I'm just gonna copy this ID here. We're gonna hit ID, and we're going to list a specific system user. So if we go back into our documentation, look at system users, we want to list a system user, a very specific one user. And again, we can do it by user ID, right? So this is where we want to get the user ID. There are some filters, but again, I haven't really played with this because, like, for instance, this is grabbing the users directory, which is a v2 endpoint, but apparently there's some really cool other things that we can do that I need to dive into. But we're just going to go ahead and grab this particular user. So we're going to go ahead and dive back into Postman. And again, we need to do what? We need to grab our variables for these things. So we have our API key, and we have our headers, which we have our org ID as well. And then we're going to hit save on that. All right. So now what we want to do is we have our ID, right? Which we need to actually throw in there. So there's a parameter here for filter, right? And then we have our ID, okay? So we're not going to do any of that. We're just gonna throw in the user ID directly into the parameter here. So we're gonna go ahead and just do that, okay? So then we're gonna hit send. And that will pull up the John Babel object as well, right? So we've got the exact same user by sending in the ID of that particular user. Really cool stuff. All right, let's go ahead and create a user. Now, if we want to look at creating a user, we want to post a system user. So there's only 4 fields that are required, but if you do it, if you do this, right? We're going to create a system user. If you look at the body of this, right, it's got every field. We don't want that business. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna get rid of that, and we're gonna open up our JSON object. And just because I'm lazy, we're just gonna grab this example here. We're just gonna grab everything within the quotation marks here, and we're gonna throw that in there, right? And there's a way that I can beautify it. Sure. So now it's beautified. Yay, beautified. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a user called Postman. Email address is postman at cs.jumpcloud.com, which is a fake email address. And we're going to do last name, or first name is going to be Post. And last name is going to be, you guessed it, Man. All right. Make sure you do 2 N's. Make it really cool. Man. All right, cool. All right, so now we need the headers, right? So we need our API key, right? Which we are going to grab here. We're gonna say API key. And then we also need our org ID, which we're gonna throw in as well. Org ID. And we're gonna hit save just for kicks and giggles, right? You know he needs to be saved because there's this little dot next to the endpoint. All right, so now we're gonna hit send. And if all went okay, we would get a status 200, the time that it took to do it, right? And then we should get a list of all the things that we sent to JumpCloud. So now if I go back over into my JumpCloud admin panel, we now have our new user, Man Post, or Postman, right? And you go in here and it has all the information that we passed in. Really neat, right? We can also delete a user, which we can probably just do that real quick because it wasn't that long of a process now that we got it down. So we can delete a system user. And what we need to do though is we need to tie in the ID of that particular user. Well, we just created a user, right? And so we got the ID already from that. So we know that ID. So now we're gonna go ahead and delete this user. So we're gonna grab the ID of the user and we're gonna look at the header, right? And so we've got our xorg ID. And we got our API key. Hit save and send. And bad request. Okay, so it looks like it's passing in system user ID. We don't really care about this part. Bad request invalid. Oh. System user ID. Okay, that's what we need. All right, send. All right, so now we got our status 200 and looks like we deleted that user. So if we go back into our admin portal here, you see that the Postman user was completely deleted from our organization. What's really cool is that if you look at directory insights here, you actually can capture all of the things that we just did. So I just deleted a user, right? And you can see that the user that did it, you can see who I deleted, the whole nine, right? All from directory insights. And you can actually leverage this insights. It doesn't say that it was done through the API, which would be very nice. Actually it does, off method API key right here. I lied. So your auth method shows that it was the delete user was done through the API key. So if you're looking for anything like in a sim tool or alerting, and you want to see, hey, what basically like endpoints or authorizations are we getting through the API key, you would basically just do the same thing. You would filter out the auth method being API key, and then you would get notifications through your sim tool that this action, whether that be deleting a user or creating a user, was done through the API key. So I hope that helps. I hope that gets everyone started at least understanding how to use Postman and how to get a very basic understanding of how to use the JumpCloud API and how to use Postman to do testing. The next step would be to take this into some type of tool like I said, Power Automate, or Zapier, or IFTT, Integromat, whatever the case might be, to then take these pieces of information and map them to other pieces of data, right? So if you had data coming in from another application or from your ticket manager, you'd be able to pass in these key value pairs, right? Account locked, true or false, right from those endpoints, and be able to make direct changes to your JumpCloud directory. Well, I hope that helps. If you do want to see more automations with the API, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe, maybe even make a comment or two, letting me know what you want to see. We can go ahead and start to create those. So again, thanks so much. Have a great day. See you next time.